I'm Ali Zaidi. How else do you want me to introduce myself?
I guess we'll find out, won't we? As we go
Indeed,
along. The whole thing will
indeed.
be a
The
long
name is a
intro.
name, which was the given context by my parents, bless them. Um, but I was born in Bombay way back half a century ago. And then when I was about 3.5 or 4, we migrated to Pakistan with mum and dad. Because dad was a film director and his brothers who had migrated at the time of partition to Pakistan, they wanted him to come over and establish himself there. And yeah, Baba decided to pack up his stuff and take the 2 kids and the wife and go to yonder land, which was so different from Bombay.
Where was it in Pakistan you went to?
They were sensible. Initially, instead of giving us a big shock, they took us to Karachi to begin with. And they also wanted to kind of make sure that they slowly eased into the otherness. So Karachi was fairly similar because it was a port city and so on. So for the first 8 or 9 months, we stayed in Karachi, and then we went further north, which is Pakistan, which is Lahore in Pakistan, no? Which was a very different scenario because the language that was spoken there was very different, the foods were different, the names of all the things were very, very different. We didn't know what wasps were at that age because they were bright yellow in color, so we thought they were butterflies, and me and my brother got badly stung because we were trying to pick the butterflies. So it was an amazing time growing up in Lahore, and then there were always the summer holiday journeys going across to Bombay to be with the family, mum's side of the family, and we did that till the politicians allowed that, and when there were wars for many years, we couldn't. I couldn't be there to see or say goodbye to my grandma. Likewise, once the borders reopened, then I was much older, and then it was much more fun to actually go and travel and experience Bombay as an adult, as a young adult. So I did my art school in Lahore. I used to draw on books all the time. And I remember particularly getting my wrist slapped because in the Islamic studies book, you'd get the paragraphs written in Arabic, then the translations in English. And if the verses were quite short, there'd be the exciting blank page underneath. So I'd draw the men and women, and of course the tutors would come and rap me on my knuckles that you mustn't draw. When we all die and it's the end of the world, you'll have to breathe life into those drawings. And it's like, wow, isn't that an exciting prospect to be able to kind of... And I'd look at the guys that I'd draw and I'd kind of think, now which ones will I really make come to life? So I'd kind of plotted all of that. But one of the most interesting things actually, that aspect of displacement from a very early age, which I didn't recognize and didn't really understand what the impact of it would be till I only grew much older, was that when we would go to India, they'd all kind of turn around and say, "Oh, you Pakistanis." And in Pakistan, forever we were known as, "Oh, those Indians who came here." So it was that idea of, where do you belong and all of that. That has really been a crucial factor in, I'd say, how my being has been, how my being has evolved, and how the work kind of manifests aspects of that all the way through. Because it was my grandma at some point, I remember, before she died, so it was probably the last time that I'd seen her. I must have been 15 or 14. And I was really distraught because so many of my friends in Bombay, they were not talking to me because this, the Bangladesh war had happened by that time, and they kept saying, "You Pakistanis are really nasty pieces of work." It was like, you were my mates, what happened? And he said, no, you're Pakistani now. So I was having a little cry on her shoulder saying, Nani, look at this is just terrible, this is just pathetic. Where do I belong, huh? So she said, where are your 2 feet? And I was like, looking at my feet saying, here. No, where are they? And I said, here, in your kitchen. I said, well, think about it. Take your home wherever your feet go. And I was far too young at that time to kind of really grasp the value of what she was saying. But strangely, that has stayed with me in a big way. So now being in Britain for the last 25 years, in London for the last 25 years, does it matter where home is? No. Home is, the idea is reference points for me. And you kind of go along wherever you do, and you accrue some kind of familiarity from wherever you are and make that your place. You kind of, and that is what I meant when I said that the displacement had been very crucial and important, because I tried to fit anyway between that kind of madness of India and Pakistan. And then you kind of come to UK and categorically just become a Paki. So it was interesting that, how is it that then you begin to make work where you don't end up feeling as if you're the ambassador for your ethnicity, and you let go of that very, very quickly. But of course that happened initially when I came to UK, because all eyes were upon me to kind of go, oh, so you're from Pakistan, you're the authentic Pakistani, which is like, whatever that means,
So why did your 2 feet come to the UK?
I got a British Council scholarship to come and do my master's. And I never thought that I would, because they were only going to send one person from the country for 2 years. And I'd applied like a lot of my other colleagues had. I was teaching photography in the art school by that time. And I'd also done 4 years of working in advertising agencies, and kind of getting to the point of being the art director, I just kind of realized that it was really not for me.
But did you not come at age of 19?
No, here I was 25 when I came.
25, sorry.
I was my golden peak of 25 when I came here.
That's interesting. So when you say golden peak,
Well,
how
golden
did that-
peak, I'm saying because I'm 50 now, so I was literally 25 then.
No, but it's a kind of structure, isn't it, in your life, in a sense? If you've got a golden peak and you see that as a golden peak.
Golden peak as an age golden peak. I'm very cack-handedly saying golden peak, because this might get cut, but the angle of the erection begins to go down after 25. That's why I'm saying that was the golden peak. But actually, I'd kind of applied for the scholarship, and then I found out that I've got it. And I came here to do what I called at that point mix and match MA. It was only Chelsea that was offering the course called Alternative Media, where you could literally mix and match whatever you wanted to do. And personally for me, that is where I felt I belonged as far as the practice was concerned. Because whether it manifested itself as a theatre piece or as an installation or as a still image or a video or a combination of all of those things, that kind of made much more sense to me. Because in many ways I was like kind of trying to defy genres and defy the little kind of boxes within which things are kept.
And were you doing that already in Pakistan?
Sort of. I had started that already. Because working in advertising, I'd also done quite a lot of puppeteering, and we were doing puppets which were kind of children's stories, and using that in mainstream theatres, then training a whole lot of young generation of puppeteers to use the glove puppets. And then at the same time, when you think about advertising world employs all of these things and more, because the sensibility is really about what are you going to sell. And however you want to get that idea across, you create your campaigns accordingly. And at the same time, once I started teaching in photography, then it was conceptually developing that idea more, even with the students, that actually it's not about going and grabbing the moment. You create the moment. Because what is in front of the frame is your choice. And you really have to play with that.
So how much of it was your choice coming to England and changing your whole direction of your life from Pakistan to...
It was a chance, not a choice. It was just by chance. And I got some fantastic tutors. To begin with, there was one person. She was a photography tutor, and bless her cotton socks. She looked at the portfolio, and as she was flicking through after the 10th or 11th page, she kind of said, I can't make any comment. I think you are highly influenced by Robert Mapplethorpe, and I know nothing about your culture, so I can't make any comment at all. I don't know where you come from. So I was like, I'm saying, so who's Robert Mapplethorpe? And he said, well, your work is just like his. I was like, but where is Robert Mapplethorpe from? I mean, is he a printmaker? Is he a photographer? Does he write? Like what? So you don't know who he is? It's like, no, never heard of the bugger. So she took me to the library. And of course, the first image that she showed me was the black man in the polyester suit. And I was like, this is just the most wonderful, reductive, cultural distillation of you're gay, that man is gay, you must have been watching his work, and hence you're making work which is this. So I kind of went to my rector and said, look, the British Council is not paying this amount of money for me to be here to deal with people who are going to be so ignorant. So I'm going to have to ask them to change my college. And the rector just kind of changed my tutor. So that was fantastic. And bless this woman, she was so full of guilt. She gave me a 6x7 Pentax. And she said, keep it, use it. Which is like, fine. I'll let you kind of wallow in your guilt. But while I was here, very, very soon, I met Keith. And it was very much a match made in heaven in that sense, if I was to go by that phrase, because on the outside, he looked more Indian than I did. And there was not an ounce of Indianism in him. Well, in fact, there was a lot of affectedness of wanting to understand what his Indian roots were. There were a lot of cross references of work that referred to, him being Indian. But when I think back about a lot of them, they were somebody trying to grapple with understanding what is not yours, but you have heard and you have listened about it and you have read the theory and you're getting to grips with it, which was beautiful because it effectively illustrated another displacement for me.
First, we should say at this point, this is Keith Khan that you're referring to.
Yes, Keith Khan I'm referring to, because he will get mentioned more and more, because then Keith Khan and I, we started working together. Initially, he'd only employ me as a backdrop painter for his projects and pay me crap money, but the idea was that we wanted to be together. And slowly and gradually, we started conceiving projects together and making projects together, and we made some wonderful collaborations.
And Keith is from Trinidad, isn't he?
Yes, his parents are from Trinidad.
Yeah. But he was born here?
Wimbledon, lovely Wimbledon. But his ma and baba, they're both from Trinidad. And as we figure, we don't quite know, but there is such a warped history of the indentured labor going into the Caribbean. So we don't really know the exact history of who arrived where and at what time. Yeah, so it's that magic of displacement stays there, you know. And interesting that within the sensibility of the any of the languages from India or Pakistan, in Trinidad, there's none of that apart from the names used for the foods. So the roti remains the national, it has the national status, the dal puri. You have baras, you have pakoras, and you know, all these kind of things. And of course, the Indian popular cinema holds great value there. There were some of his relatives who could sing the entire songs but had no idea what the words meant. So when I went for the first time, I almost became the real McCoy because they would refer and say, "Oh, he comes from a Muslim family, so you know, he'd tell you what is what," and it was like, I so don't know anything about that. And at the same time, there would be references because they knew that my father was a film director, so a lot of things would get referred to. How did they do this, and what was going on there? So that was all great. That was all great.
So actually, you had a lot of support from your family in your chosen path.
Um, by default, yes, but Baba, my father, he was the most vocal in saying that I shouldn't go and pursue the arts because his example was very clear. He would point to himself and say, "Look at me. Have I got a house to give you guys? No. We live in a rented house. There are times that I don't even know if there is going to be any income for the next few months or not. So do something else. Do not go into arts. If you are to live in Pakistan, do not do that because this country does not value it." So the only bit that I took away from him was that in the end, well, both mum particularly, she was very adamant in saying that just follow your heart. Follow your heart. Be good at what you want to do and do it. Whereas dad, in the end, he kind of gave in, he budged in by saying, do commercial art, don't go into fine art. And commercial art at that time was about graphic design or working in advertising agencies. So my career kind of started from that platform as such. Because to be honest, when I was in the art school doing my foundation, I realized that fine arts, I'm not cut out for fine arts because most of the fine artists they were more of a stereotype of a fine artist than a fine artist is. They were quite recluse and, you know, spending more time by themselves and thinking that because they're the artist, they have to do what they have to do. And that art is not for me. It doesn't kind of tickle me at all. Because somewhere along the line, I believe that whatever you do, you always consider the other in the process of making the work. And if that is the case, then why is it fine art? And why do you need to give a name to it? If there are people involved, then you're making art which involves people. So I kind of tend to that's a very important factor in the way I think and I conceive of work or I orchestrate projects. It is always about either getting other people's stories that inform the work or their points of views that inform the work that often is not even created by one person, if you know what I mean, because it's not about solo authorship. Often it gets into a blurred territory that whose work would it be called in the end? And I don't give a flying toss about it, to be honest.
So you have people that are not from the South Asian community who looks at somebody like you and defines you as South Asian, and you are absolutely the other way around. You don't want to be defined in any way at all. So how do you manage your development and your career in the context of Britain?
Um, I don't think. Did I say that I don't ever want to be seen as a Southeast Asian person? No, 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 no. The thing is that where definitions become debilitating is that if you are never seen beyond that tag. Think about social media. The more tags there are, the more your work will be seen. Um, if the ethnicity becomes the be all, then that is a terrible crime. I mean, that really is criminal to put somebody as this is a pigeon. Well, at least say if it's a wood pigeon. Do you know what I mean? Or if it's a dove. So in that sense, it's like of course, why would I deny the different heritages that I have? Because they only make you richer, and it enriches your life and your references and your understanding of different positionings. So that I have never wanted to kind of deny as such. But when it comes to the question of authenticity, there I have a big question mark that what the hell authentic means. Whose authenticity are we talking about? My life or my experience is authentic, completely authentic to who I am. But if you are trying to look at India or Pakistan through the eyes of colonial historians, then no, I'm not that. And India is not that, and neither is Pakistan. And, you know, everything changes and everything evolves. So that kind of reductive definitions of anything have really been a bane in my neck. You know, I've never enjoyed that. However, my starting point with dealing with the question that you asked, that how do you deal in the context of being in Britain, is the same that I used to deal with in Pakistan, for instance. That the starting point is often the familiar. The starting point is often something that people think they know, and then you subvert the things around. Then you bring more context, you enrich that context and bring different stories into it, bring different points of view into it. So by the end, you don't, even those who are wanting to put the label that, oh, so this is British Asian theatre, would kind of find other things within it to kind of say, yes, it is, but. And I like the word but.
Why do you think you're inspired by these issues and the way that you've kind of shaped your artistic journey? Because, I mean, everybody is different, right? What do you think is your unique thing? What inspires you to do this?
Inquiry. And realizing that everything is truth and nothing is truthful. Because for a very long time, I used to imagine that neutrality is a very important thing and you have to be neutral. And then I realized that there is no such thing as neutral in the world, because whose neutrality are we talking? There has to be some particular slant on how something is being perceived or talked about. Have I pulled the thing? No. Okay. So in that sense, I think there's very blurred territory, personally for me, within what is theatre or what is work or what is life, and where does it all start and where does it end? It doesn't. If that answers what you're kind of saying or what you were asking.
Or perhaps you could take us through how you formed and why you formed something like Moti Roti, because that could be interesting for us.
We didn't set out to create Moti Roti because we one day thought that we should create Moti Roti. Um, Keith had done a big project that was Flying Costumes, Floating Tombs, and yes, we won't go into the dates, but you were also part of that all that time ago. And then for a short period of time after that, I got into doing a full-time job in Newham. As they used to have a British Asian arts organization there. I can't even remember the name of it, but Apna Arts, I think it was called. And they got me as the arts worker. And it was run by people who were two families, both from Pakistan. And their entire slant was Pakistan, 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 which is like, you're calling it Asian arts. It's Apna Arts and it's Asian arts. Open your vision. So I did loads of interesting projects there, staying with some points of references that were familiar, but then really departing straight away. And that organization didn't last very long because there was such a history of it not being effective in the community that by the time that a year and a half I was there, and it kind of ended up in Theatre Royal Stratford East and in the Black Art Gallery and all, that did not matter because by that time the funders, the council had decided that, unless you guys change your entire board, you will not get the money. And the board did not want to let go. So anyway, that came to an end. But through the time that I created this thing called Colors of Asia, which was a combined festival. There were films that were being screened, there were visual arts exhibitions, there were also performances that took place in Theatre Royal Stratford East. Bless Philip Headley, because I'd kind of literally walked into Theatre Royal and I kind of said, well, I work within the same borough and I want to do something here. It's a matinee show, but whatever the matinee is, I want the presence here. And Philip was very enamored and he kind of said, and what kind of a program is it? Which is like, it's called Colors of Asia. So he said, oh, Indian dance then. I was like, no, I've got Pitfong, that, and there were some other performers. So it covered the broad terrain of India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, China, and where were they from? They were from Malaysia, I think, right? But I was really looking at the idea of, let's explode the idea of Asia, because Asia is not just this little thing. It's the largest continent in the world. And if we're going to name something Asian, then at least let's deal with it. So that was interesting. And then soon after that, Keith approached Philip Headley again to say, I'd like to do something on the main theatre. And we had been quite kind of flummoxed by the idea that there was not a lot of theatre on offer for the Southeast Asian community at the time. There was often adaptations that were going on. And it's like, why is it only adaptations? Loka is great, but hey, come on. Melodrama exists in our very soul and our core. So why are we only looking at references that are coming from Spain? Where is the contemporary pulse? And then we realized that actually around Brick Lane, there was a very vibrant community, and it all revolved around going to the shops and buying the VHS tapes or renting the VHS. And these were Bangladeshi speaking communities, yet they were buying or hiring the Indian films to watch. And somehow or the other, it evolved in a way that, well, let's do a musical. Let's do a Bollywood musical, because there are references that we have. There are things that I've been grown up with, and they are very much part of my ethos. Keith has the interest in costumes, and let's do something. And Keith is very good at kind of combining the different mediums. So he designed the show conceptually in a way that the film was going to be a very integral part of it. And then film being my baby, it was like, okay, let's conceive of all the sections that will be dedicated to the film and the rest which will be live, and let's play with that. So we did Moti Roti, Patli Chunni. So for those who don't know the meaning of it, Moti Roti means fat bread, Patli Chunni means thin veils. And if you happen to be classical, in the classical sense, if you're a good woman, then you're able to roll rotis that are incredibly fine, and your veil has to be thick enough. So it was just the opposite. Our women were dancing in the rain, and they could not roll rotis to save their lives, and half the cast was gay, and all kinds of subversions going on in there. But we stayed true to the idea of understanding that you have to give something familiar to people to understand, and then you can create the new. Because if your starting point is that this is the new and this is blah, then often it is just going to be off-putting to those who are perhaps going to be people like my mother or some of my friends who wouldn't necessarily go to the theatre. So let's create something for them that they would be able to recognize straight away. So we employed a couple of performers, one from India that had a big name and quite a big following, and another person who had a big following on the television in UK, and then a lot of new people who were brought into it. And that worked. That worked really, really well.
So was that your first kind of bona fide theatrical production?
Yes, because it also happened within the Proscenium March scenario. And then we kind of went on to do two more of those, which were dedicated to theatres and kind of had a proper touring scenario going on. The second one was called Ma, and that premiered at Royal Court as part of the New Writers or Barclays New Stages, I think it was called. And with Moti Roti, we had done initial workshops in kind of developing the core structure. And we, both Keith and I, we have a lovely mutual friend, Munni Kabir, who in fact introduced and popularized the idea of how we know Bollywood in UK, because she used to present a program called Movie Mahal on Channel 4, which really kind of introduced the sensibility for the world here to understand that actually what is the huge cinema from India, the popular cinema from India that has no understanding out here. So we'd involved her, we'd involved other performers, other dancers, and other friends to be part of the creative workshop in the beginning, to kind of then decide what kind of characters are we going to keep, because we wanted to stay within the genre and then subvert the genre. It was written in English and Urdu, but not in the way that a lot of bilingual productions were at the time, because having experienced some of the bilingual productions at that moment in time, I would really go and scratch my head and say, this is really insane. I mean, there was like an ongoing joke with me that you say, Uran kabutar, pigeon fly, look, dekho, asman, sky. So it was literally like whatever the words were, then you'd have the other sentence being repeated in the other language. And it was like, this is not how things go. Because when you're speaking in that mishmash way, then you start introducing words in a way that's far more fluid. And there are times that you say a certain sentence in a certain language, and then you continue in English, and people are still able to pick up and understand what it is and how it is. So it was a long-term collaborator of Keith, who he had worked with before, Diana Sguerra. She wrote the script she wrote the screenplay, shall we say, for Moti Roti. And there was a substantial amount of work that I did with her, because it was like, well, where I'm using Urdu language in it, you need to understand why I'm doing that. And then we have to construct the rest of the story flowing from that. So it was fantastic to be involved in something which was so like part of the body and the soul for so long. It took a very long time to get out of that phase. But as things tend to happen, if you do something and it's successful, then anybody commissioning you wants you to do a repeat performance. So we also thought that, okay, we've kind of hit on a formula, let's work in the same way, and there has to be a bit of dance, and there has to be a bit of songs, and there has to be a bit of films, but let's work in that same module. So the second production that we did, Ma, it was kind of pretty much in the same format, except that the story had moved from Bollywood to include the displacement scenario of Trinidad, and then another woman who is the two sisters who were based. One was based in London, the other in Trinidad. But the storyline kind of stayed somewhere, the thread stayed the same. It was about displacements. Migration was always an important part within the story, and there was a populist twist. And within that populist twist, then there were the subversions, whether one was beginning to kind of talk about issues of sexuality, or what were the predetermined ways of looking at certain things. There were always some little offshoots that went on the sides. And in both instances, actually, we were working with writers who were new. They weren't necessarily writing for theatre. It was Ash Kotak, who we commissioned to work on Ma, and then another person who was a journalist, who was also a journalist, Dolly Dhingra, who wrote our last one that we did in UK as such, which was very much part of the trilogy, called One Night, which was then looking at the film culture, but through the eyes of the courtesans, and partly it was little mystery, but working in the same genre of how the Bollywood kind of tries to tickle all senses and all sensibilities. And after that, we gave a long gap, and we kind of thought, right, we're not doing this, because everybody is wanting us to do the same. And there are other companies that have started, who started their life from Moti Roti, and now they're doing exactly what the format of Moti Roti is, and they're doing it really well. So let them. Why should we be doing the same? There has to be something extra in it for us. Where is our learning going on? Where is our own personal challenge as such? And then that was the time that we'd seen a production by the Builders Association in New York. They were doing Faust, and we went and saw that production. And that was beautiful because they used live, and they were using lens-based media, which was all live but intercut and mixed with the recorded media and live media taking place all together. And it was magical. And Marianne Weems had also seen Moti Roti Patli Chuni, and she thought that was magical. So when there were two parties who were completely in awe of each other's work, we were very nicely kind of segued by Norman Frisch, who was a common friend, and he's a dramaturg, and he kind of said, why don't you two guys make something together? So we did. We did Aladdin, which was the last kind of theatre production as such that we did, which took place within the theatre. But the expansive thinking in that was that we didn't want it only to be a theatre production. It was looking at the whole kind of scenario of call centers. And back in 2001, it was so new that people could not tell their names, and they could not tell where they were calling from. They would all say that we're calling from the international call center or the international base, but they couldn't tell where. And if I'm not mistaken, actually the process of arriving at the call centers was much later, because we kept talking about using a storyline which we didn't have to describe too much. So we were talking about doing a pantomime. I wasn't too hot on the idea of pantomime, but I was going along with it. Norman was very keen that why don't we do something which revolves or we subvert the genre of pantomime, because it's so populist and it's so politicized in many ways. And often it is subverted because the dame is being played by the man and the main woman character, the main male character is always played by the woman, and so let's work on that. So we arrived at kind of siphoning it down. We kind of liked the story of Aladdin, because it was one of the stories that is a complete construct. It was never part of the 1001 Nights. So the French guy who translated the stories had slipped one of his own, and that became so popular. So it's like, how amazing is that? It kind of went with the whole sensibility of mixing and matching. And then Marianne came across the letter or an article from New York Times, which was alluding to the problematics of the call center, that we dare not say our name, but we are blah, blah, blah. And then we took the journey to India, to Bangalore, to go visit some of these call centers. And we also kind of very quickly realized that not everything can be summated within the theatrical production. So there has to be a website which will work as an online archive for all the material that we have summated, but equally well, there'd also be some kind of an invitation for people. So there was a wishing site, there was a wishing section there that send your wish to the www genie of the web. And those wishes were pulled out onto the ticker tape within the theatrical performance. And depending on wherever we were going, the wishes were much more localized. So in Australia, when we were performing, their general elections were about to take place. And a lot of those wishes were to do with the politics of the place. So it became really poignant. And then there was a massive amount of departure from how things are written, because I'd interviewed the staff extensively. Those conversations formed the backbone of how the script got developed, because we had a script doctor, as the Americans call it. And that script doctor kind of moved and rejigged those conversations around to say, well, what can we develop from this? And in fact, a lot of the spoken dialogue was the dialogue that was spoken by the people in the call centers, but it was being plonked within the idea of that is the stage. So there was a lot of wonderful experimentation going on in there. And then third was the music video. The music was written by Shrikant Sriram from Shri and Badmash, because he also happened to be from Bangalore. So it became really interesting that we were kind of picking elements from the Silk Route as such and reframing the whole thing. And after that, Keith and I, we said goodbye to each other on a personal front as well as work-wise, because he ended up going and leading Rich Mix, and I became the sole artistic director for Moti Roti from 2004 till 2012. So my strand kind of developed more in the direction of collating different points of views, aggregating things, and then presenting projects.
So in a sense, your audience and participants became one, really.
They became very blurred.
Yeah.
Yes, they became very blurred.
So are you ever conscious of an audience that sort of absorbs your work, or the other way around, the audience becoming protagonists?
It changes. It really depends on the project setting. Because there are times that the territories are so blurred that the audience, by virtue of their participation, becomes the performer. And there are times that the audience is still a passive audience in that sense. And there are times that the audience is the participant. And there are times that they can place themselves out of it and still see how things are being worked at. I mean, I think it goes back to um, being on the periphery or not being seen as either Indian or Pakistani, that I kind of tend to create as many ways of a welcome. Not necessarily that, hey, you're welcome, but so that the person does not feel out of place. And that can be the participant, that can be the audience, that can be the other fellow artists. You're aware of the differences, because that is my personal philosophy, that I'm not trying to say that we're all the same. Far from it. I seek out the differences in things that look similar, because that is just how I am. Because that goes back to the same idea of what is authentic or what is Indian. Then I can go, no, 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 no. Hang on. Indian is not just one. There are a million. And at times when somebody would also provide the anti-conversation and say, oh, but this person is Indian or this person is specific to whatever, then you kind of go, hey, hang on, but there are strands of similarities, and those similarities bring you together. So it's all the time oscillating between finding the difference, finding the similarities, and presenting those in a way that you don't feel alienated, and yet you become aware that actually you are different. You're not everything that is being talked about. So there becomes a point of connection. There becomes a point of connection, and I'm really interested in getting people to understand the connections.
And how do you yourself feel connected with your work and with the people you create work with? Because how would you kind of explain your role?
With great difficulty. There used to be a fantastic television soap in Pakistan, in which the main protagonist always used to say, "Main ta mali haan," that, oh, I'm only a gardener. And there are times that I find myself using that phrase and explaining to people that I'm only a gardener. There are times that I kind of sow the seeds, and that is my role. There are times that I'm very actively weeding the plants and making sure that what we want to create is the kind of garden that you want to create. And then there are times that I kind of use the facility as a facilitator, as a conduit, to allow different things to take place. And I'm quite happy with that.
But this is quite fascinating, because actually that's what you're doing right now with your supper clubs
Yes,
and your garden.
yes.
So really,
Food has become very important, because I think the older I get, it's more about the ecology, or understanding how important ecology is. And ecology is not about the rainforests. Ecology is the micro and the macro all enmeshed together. Where you live, what you breathe, and why, and where does it come from. It's about finding the context of everything. It's about having an inquiry. And that inquiry is what shapes my life. It informs my practice. It informs those who are around me, and the learning goes on. If people cannot put a name to it, then that is fine. At the end of the day, I need to kind of earn a living from what I do. So if somebody is happy to call me an artistic director and pay me a fee, that is fine. If somebody kind of pays me a fee as a consultant, that is okay too. And then there are times that I'm brought in as whatever name they choose. And my interest is in creating projects and creating spaces which connect people and allow people to question.
and so your future is going to be like possibly going to India to do scene painting, or what is it?
No, the production design for this film is, I mean, in as much as I'd love to do scenic painting again, but I think it means that I wouldn't be doing anything. I'd only be suggesting a whole team of art directors to run around and do the things. Again, it's the thing of a name, a production designer. What is a production designer? But hey, or working with a project which is in Turin, a residency that is coming up with the Turin University is in fact collaborating with their interactive department and the theatre department. But far from theatre as we imagine, it is going to be looking at the ingredients, the food ingredients. So interactively, the choreographers and the performers would be able to kind of tap into the history of where those ingredients come from, their journey of migration, and then connection with the local people within Turin as to how the different families use that ingredient and what kind of dishes do they make. And eventually, as an audience member, you would see the performance and then hopefully go somewhere where you'd be able to eat some of those dishes. And the challenge is that that also has to go as a self-standing installation for a 3-month period. So that is something really exciting I'm looking forward to. Then using food as a starting point for conversations and placemaking. My last project with Moti Roti that I did was called Potluck Chicago. And it was looking at creating a space where each person is bringing something that they cook, but collectively you make a feast. And the conversations then were about what do we want the city to become. So even though the residency is long over, but the project is still going on, the potluck is Chicago, they are still doing amazing things, and once in a blue moon through Facebook, I'm still doing my thing of like kind of, why don't you do blah, or what if, and is there anything I can do from here that would help you guys with what you're doing? There's another project, an interesting possibility, which is more, again, like a lifelong learning project, looking at addiction and creating memoirs of addiction. And this is taking place between Turkey, UK, and Italy. My starting point is again going to be food, because we are what we eat, and perhaps there is some pearl of wisdom somewhere that gives an indication to the psyche of an addict. It doesn't necessarily have to be an addiction for drugs or alcohol, but it could be addiction to anything. I think personally that if you are not open to eating lots of things, then you're already defining your addiction. So my own interest in learning about what is it that we put in ourselves, what is the process that goes on in the background outside of the frame, what is it that goes on that informs something, and then what are the possible cultivation outcomes that can come on. And cultivation in the broadest sense, you're cultivating ideas, you're cultivating conversations. So yes, it's all very blurred and I love it.